Hi, welcome to another historical story of Wookey Hole Caves. My name is Neil. Today we are talking about the legend of the Witch of Wookey Hole, and we will be walking through the caves here today, and I will also be showing you evidence that shows that witchcraft was taking place in the caves here hundreds of years ago. Now, if you haven't been here before, the story, the legend of the witch is that a lady lived in the cave, and locals around the area, they were terrified of her. They believed that when things in their lives went wrong, when they went missing people, when their crops failed, when their cattle died, they blamed the witch. It came to a point and they asked for some help. A few of these people went to Glastonbury, and the abbot in Glastonbury is asked to send over a monk. The monk is called Father Bernard. It's going to be Father Bernard's job to make his way into the cave alone, although he knows it's a dangerous mission for him to do this, to come into the cave and to deal with the witch that is said to be living in the caves here. So, in this part of the show cave as you're walking in, Father Bernard would have made his way down through. However, in the days of Father Bernard, the cave floor was a lot higher than it is today. You're looking at a floor around this level. So to get into the cave to find the witch, Father Bernard would have gone down through here, because with the floor this high, this little space above me would have been the entranceway to the original caves. Now, a latch lifter was discovered when these caves were excavated, and it is thought that the witch living in this cave could have quite likely had a door. So if you imagine a door across here, this is the way the witch went, and also this is the way that Father Bernard followed the witch down deeper into the caves ahead. As you make your way into the cave, the first part you get to is a cave called the Goat Herder, and this is where in 1912 the local archaeologist called Herbert Balch discovered the skeleton of a human. Close to the bones that were discovered, he also discovered bones from at least 2 kid goats, pottery, knives, and a very strange alabaster ball. Now, alabaster is a natural material, but it can in some cases be sort of slightly transparent, slightly see-through. And the round ball, which he found, does resemble what you imagine a crystal ball to look like. So when it was found and when the bones were found, they thought, have we found actual evidence of the witch of Wookey Hole? Was this person living up here by themselves with the goats? Is this the goat herder, the witch that they talked about in the stories? As far as the legend goes, this part of the cave is where Father Bernard would have made his way in after making his way through the small entrance. And in the legend, he was told of a passageway called Hell Ladder. Now, in the story, the legend, the Hell Ladder route, locals told him would lead him to hell, and if he went down, the chances were that he may not return. So walking into the cave today, we have a passageway that was made for us in 1927, the stairs over here to my right. However, the original way, the way that Father Bernard and the witch would have gone, is the one up here to my left. So up here, Father Bernard would have actually climbed to the top, climbed down on rocks wedged between the walls, almost like steps, to take him down further into the cave. And this is and has been called Hell Ladder for many, many hundreds of years. So this is the passageway he followed, and as he made his way to the top and was about to go down into Hell Ladder, that is when, in the legend, he hears the witch laughing as she runs off deeper into the caves ahead of him. So after leaving the Goat Herder, you would make your way down the steps here. Just going to show you the actual way that people back in the day would have actually made their way down, because it is actually a lot different. So over here, in front of me in my torchlight, this is the bottom of Hell Ladder. So this is the route that people back in the day would have taken to get down into the show caves that we see today. And this is also, in the legend of the witch, this is the route that Father Bernard would have crawled his way down through, candle in hand, making his way down deeper into the caves ahead of him. So after leaving the Goat Herder, you make your way down these stairs. Now, back in the day, when people lived in the caves, and obviously when Father Bernard was here, this would have been a big, rocky, potentially slippery slope down into the witch's kitchen. In the legend, when Father Bernard gets down here, just because of his candlelight, he can't really see much into the cave at all. He can hear noises, which he thinks is the witch. And so he makes his way down this beach, down to the river, where he collects some water. Now, in his chalice, he has some river water, which he then says a prayer. And this will turn the water into holy water. And then he begins to walk around, scattering the holy water around the cave. And on doing this, he hears the most terrifying scream. And again, by his candlelight, shining in the direction from where the noise came from, he sees that he has turned the witch of Wookey Hole to stone. The holy water had turned her to stone forever. And when you visit the caves, you can actually see this dark silhouette here as the profile of the witch of Wookey Hole. Now, you do have a profile, but what you also have, and for me, these are I think the stranger things about this, is there are some faces within this. There's a face either side I can't show you, and there's a face this side which I can show you with my torchlight. Now, if you imagine walking into this cave as it would have been in darkness, with your candle out in front of you, perhaps this face here at the top of the formation is what actually Father Bernard and the people back in the history of the caves were seeing, because at the top of here, you hopefully can see the face of a woman looking almost back to where I'm standing. You can see her eyes, you can see her nose, you can see an open mouth and just a few kind of jagged teeth with the hair around the side of the head. And obviously back in the cave in complete darkness, this face would completely just jump out of nowhere looking back at you through the flickering candlelight. Now, this formation we're looking at, the first time this was recorded as the Witch of Wookey Hole was in 1628, when that was first written down as the witch. But it does predate, it goes back to 1470. In 1470, a visitor called William of Worcester visited the caves and described this as a female form. So it does go back many, many hundreds of years in terms of the history of this formation. One other thing to mention, over here on the floor, mustn't forget, we have the witch's dog. So this dog, or obviously in the case of a witch, a familiar, an assistant to help the witch, this is said to be the dog that was also turned to stone by the water scattered by Father Bernard the monk. And the other thing just to mention is, of course, back in the day when these things were talked about, people's perceptions of witches and witchcraft and everything around those kind of things was very much different to today. In the 1500s and 1600s, people believed there were witches, believed there was witchcraft happening. So these things obviously were very, very important to people back in those times as well. And similarly, this cave, known as the Witch's Kitchen, has formations in here which again have names that go back many hundreds of years. And these things in the cave are things like a cooking pot. Over here, this pond, behind the witch, we have a thing called the witch's oven, which again resembles an oven of the sort of 1800s. So there are features in the cave that, again, evidence perhaps not so much about witchcraft, but obviously people believing that that witchcraft theme was running through their lives, and this witch had a house that she was living in Wookey Hole Caves. We've left the witch's kitchen behind, and now we're at the border between Chamber 2, the Great Hall, and Chamber 3, the witch's parlor. Now this area here has a name. It is called the witch's chimney, and what it is a thing called an avon. An avon is like a chimney-shaped thing, like this one up here, created by water. Water being pushed up into the rock. Now this one over here is much, much bigger and has the name the witch's chimney. Now, around the time of the 1500s, 1600s, people's belief in witchcraft and evil was obviously very strong. It controlled their lives to a degree. And people of that period would sometimes try to protect themselves in their houses. So they would mark areas around windows, door frames, fireplaces where the evil eye could come in through the chimney or through the windows or through your doors. So houses of that period have these markings. They are called ritual protection marks or witch marks. And this area here, we have them as well. So you don't notice as you're walking in, but under torchlight, you can actually see a big, big array of markings. Now, some of these markings are graffiti, people's letters, and some aren't. Now, just over here, this one here, this is a way of writing the letter J. J, as we write it, appears in the early 1500s, but this is a Latin version of J for the sound for Jesus. So this I with a line through is more than likely for Jesus. Now, you have other forms of markings. Most of them are under this chimney section here. Just before we go, I'd like to show you up in this corner, because this is quite nice, I think. You've got actually a date. There's 1780 has been marked into the rocks there. And there is another one just behind this red light down here. If I can get under here with my torchlight, you have 1722 clearly on the rock. Again, from someone coming down into the caves at those periods in time. But the real collection of witch marks are under here. So if we go under the chimney, and if you look up, you can see why it's called the chimney. Again, created by water many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago. So, witch marks, you have very, very different types. You have ones called Marian marks, which is a series of letters. You can sometimes have them called daisy wheels, which is like a circular thing with like a flower petal structure inside. And also ones called concentric circles. These are a series of circles that get smaller and smaller inside. Now, the circles and the daisy wheels are supposed to represent sunlight. So if you were in a cave in a dark place where you were afraid of witchcraft and all kinds of things evil, these symbols would in effect bring sunlight into the cave to help and protect you. Now, these ones we have in our caves here at Wookey Hole are a mixture of Marian marks. So you have, just here by my right, you have this one, which looks a bit like a letter M. To the left of it, you have one here, which again looks like a letter W. And you can also see the I, the old way of writing a J as well. Now, this first one here, this is called a mark for Mary. And the one to the right, the W here, this is called Virgin of Virgins. People coming down into the cave believe the evil spirits were coming down this chimney. So they came into the cave, probably in a small group of people, and whilst they scratched these markings into this area, they were saying prayers. They were saying the Lord's Prayer and also the Hail Mary. And the idea being that this prayer to Mary, the Virgin Mary, she would help them when they got home. If they did this, this would protect them for the foreseeable future, okay? There's a series, as I say, they go all the way around the cave where we're standing. You have some very nice ones over here. This one, you have again what appears to be like the I with a line through it, with a C. Now, I believe this could be for Jesus Christ, with the J and the C. And what you have next to it, this little triangle, this is the top of what is missing from the bottom. Beneath here, where this has disappeared, the rock, there should be another triangle. And this one is called a butterfly mark. And the butterfly mark was again another way of keeping evil spirits away. This shape you can't change. You can bend it over, but you can't change it. It's always there, that kind of feature. And the idea with the markings was that the more intricate they were, the evil spirits would just sort of almost say, I can't deal with this pattern, I've got to get out of here and move off to someone else's house or someone else's chimney. So these markings, as I say, this part of the pattern is part of the whole thing, why people were coming down into the caves here. But yeah, these markings are all the way around, made anywhere between 1550 and about 1750. There's one final piece of little graffiti here, which is really, really nice. It's about the same time again that people were coming down here to mark the cave. There's a date here scratched into the rock really clearly, 1706. I've had a look around, a bit of research as to perhaps why someone could have come down into the cave in 1706. 1706, the only thing I could find was that the crops that particular year failed. There was a very, very unusual weather pattern, and crops that farmers planted in 1706 were really affected. And also, in terms of the government, the country's economy, it really, really suffered from the fact of these crop failures. And so perhaps people came down thinking if they came down and said a prayer, perhaps this was sort of a prayer to reach out for some help for the years ahead. So moving on from the witch's chimney, we've walked now into the third chamber, which is called the witch's parlor, which actually was originally one of the end caves for the show cave. But over on the other side of the river, that very small dark space that you might be able to see, I'll just use my torchlight here. This is the top of an archway into a cave further on. This cave over here, chamber number 4, used to be a cave people could get into, they could use it. And the Iron Age people, we believe, used it as a burial chamber 2,500 years ago. It has been excavated when the river has been lowered. And just to explain, this river today is artificially high because of a dam that was built in the 1850s for the paper mill. One other feature about this chamber is the acoustic effect in here. Now, I've heard it twice since my days I've been working here, and on some occasions you can get the most strangest of noises created in this chamber, a noise that gets quiet to begin with and gets louder and louder and louder, and then gets quieter and quieter and quieter afterwards. And what we think happens is that the water, when it rises, it creates pressure, pushing air back further up the caves further from here. And that, a bit like an air trap in your pipes at home, creates this noise which continues around this particular chamber because, again, of its shape. But imagine back in the days when people were believing that the witches were out there, that witchcraft was happening. If they were making their way down to this area of the chimney, could it be, perhaps, that the idea for marking that area was to keep whatever was making the noise coming from there, in there, and not allowing it to get any further that way back towards the valley? We don't know for sure, but perhaps that may be one idea for sure, because to listen to a strange noise in a dark cave would have certainly created fear and suspicion, and maybe that's why the markings are made back in the chimney area of the cave here. So here we are standing beneath the Witch of Wookey Hole in the witch's kitchen. As I mentioned earlier, this was first described as a witch in 1628, and in 1748 a man called Dr. Henry Harrington, who was the physician to the Duke of York, wrote a poem about the Witch of Wookey Hole. That version has words that we probably don't use any longer, so what we have here is a special modern day version made by Christopher Binding, based on the original 1748 poem. In ancient days, the old legend says, a demonic wicked woman, no less, the Witch of Wookey, lived within this cave. To visit her dark and dreary home, be brave. The people thought this was a place like hell, wherein the hideous bleary-eyed hag did dwell. Her screeching owls did have their nests, and wolves lived in the valley, possessed, while howling within the ravine, and no wholesome plants could here be found, because the witch blasted everything living around, and blistered every last living thing. Her haggard face was foul to see, her mouth cursed everyone to be frightened, and if her eyes glanced at thee, because she always wished demonic glee, and wreaked havoc as she did destroy, and banish all godly joy. All in her prime her poets sung, no happy youth, gallant or young, ever blessed her longing arms, and hope arose her spite to vex, and blast the youth of either sex, by casting hellish charms. From Glastonbury came a learned monk, full bent to exorcise her and to banish. And well he did, for she seemed to vanish, for the mischief ever after hasn't been known, which proves after his learning was shown, the witch forevermore had been overthrown. He chanted from his godly book, he crossed the water and blessed the brook, and then with paternoster done, the ghastly hag he sprinkled over, when lo, where stood the hag before, now stood a ghastly stone. Although this learned monk did well, with a sad heart, alas, I must tell, the witch left her curse behind. Wookey folk are forsaken, smited, despite beauty and sense being united. The youth shall find no loving kind. For lo, the wicked fiend did say, the women folk have found this to this day. Men seem to have disappeared. Here's beauty, wit, and sense combined, with all that's virtuous, but sadly joy can't find, because there's few good people left behind.